Hello, everyone. I am so excited to continue reading Charlotte's Web with you. And today we are going to read chapter 8. So go ahead, get comfy and cozy, and listen to the story. I do want to tell you that the setting of chapter 8 is a little different than what we've been used to. The setting has so far been taking place at the barn, but the setting of chapter 8 is in Fern's house. And here we are, chapter 8 right here, Roman numeral 8. There's 5 and then 6, 7, 8. And the chapter is entitled A Talk at Home. On Sunday morning, Mr. and Mrs. Arable and Fern were sitting at breakfast in the kitchen. Avery, remember that's her brother, had finished and was upstairs looking for his slingshot. And slingshot I have underlined as one of our vocabulary words. I'll draw a little picture of what it looks like right here. Kind of looks like a Y, sticks put together, wooden pieces. And here is kind of an elastic part, and you would put a small stone there, and you'd cock it back and let it go, and you could, shoot tin cans or have some fun with it. And that does seem like the perfect thing and that Avery would have in his pocket. He's just that kind of outdoorsy type of kid that would like that. And Fern is continuing her conversation with her mom and dad at breakfast. Did you know that Uncle Homer's goslings had hatched? Asked Fern. How many? Asked Mrs. Arable. 7, replied Fern. There were 8 eggs, but one egg didn't hatch, and the goose told Templeton she didn't want it anymore, so he took it away. The goose did what? Asked Mrs. Arable, looking at her daughter with a queer, worried look. Now, why do you think Mrs. Arable is a little worried at this point with her conversation with Fern? Let's continue. Well, told Templeton she didn't want the egg anymore, repeated Fern. Who is Templeton? Asked Mrs. Arable. He's the rat, replied Fern. None of us like him much. Who's us? Asked Mrs. Arable. Oh, everybody in the barn cellar. Wilbur and the sheep and the lambs and the goose and the gander and the goslings and Charlotte and me. Charlotte, said Mrs. Arable. Who's Charlotte? Oh, she's Wilbur's best friend. She's terribly clever. What does she look like? Asked Mrs. Arable. Well, said Fern thoughtfully, she has 8 legs. All spiders do, I guess. Charlotte is a spider? Asked Fern's mother. Fern nodded. Yeah, a great big one. She has a web across the top of Wilbur's doorway. She catches flies and sucks their blood. Wilbur adores her. Does he really? Said Mrs. Arable rather vaguely. So Mrs. Arable's a little confused and it's not clear. That's what vaguely means. She was staring at Fern with a worried expression on her face. Now, let me ask you this. If you had a full conversation with your mom and dad at breakfast about how your dog or cat were talking to you and they were friends with the neighbor's dog and they had a conversation and what would they think? Would they be worried too? Yeah, I think they might be a little bit. Or think that you have a very creative imagination, which all of you do. Oh, yes, Wilbur adores Charlotte, said Fern. Do you know what Charlotte said when the goslings hatched? I haven't the faintest idea, said Mrs. Arable. Tell us. Well, when the first gosling stuck its little head out from under the goose, I was sitting on my stool in the corner and Charlotte was on her web. She made a speech. She said, I am sure that every one of us here in the barn cellar will be gratified to learn that after 4 weeks of unremitting effort and patience on the part of the goose, she now has something to show for it. Don't you think that was a pleasant thing for her to say? So unremitting just means patience as well. Yes, I do, said Mrs. Arable. And now, Fern, it's time to get ready for Sunday school, and tell Avery to get ready. And this afternoon you can tell me more about what goes on in Uncle Homer's barn. Aren't you spending quite a lot of time there? You go there almost every afternoon, don't you? I like it there, replied Fern. She wiped her mouth and ran upstairs. After she left the room, Mrs. Arable spoke in a low voice to her husband. I'm worried about Fern, she said. Did you hear the way she rambled on about the animals, pretending they talked? And rambled is one of our vocabulary words, and it simply means to go on and on and on and on in conversation. Mr. Arable chuckled. Maybe they do talk, he said. I've sometimes wondered. At any rate, don't worry about Fern. She's just got a lively imagination. Kids think they hear all sorts of things. Just the same, I do worry about her, replied Mrs. Arable. I think I shall ask Dr. Dorian about her the next time I see him. He loves Fern almost as much as we do, and I want him to know how queerly she is acting about the pig and everything. And queerly just means strange. I don't think it's normal. You know perfectly well animals don't talk. Mr. Arable grinned. Maybe our ears aren't as sharp as Fern's, he said. I like that sentence. Okay, I have 2 questions for you today. Why was Mrs. Arable worried about Fern? You're right. Mrs. Arable was worried about Fern because she was spending a lot of time at the barn, and not only that, she believed the animals talked, and clearly Mrs. Arable does not think they talk. What made Mrs. Arable think this? You're right. Fern told Mrs. Arable all about the animals at the barn, who they were, their names, and also about the speech Charlotte made when the goslings were born. This made Mrs. Arable think that something was wrong with her. And remember the vocabulary word that Mrs. Arable used to describe their conversation with Fern, that Fern rambled. She went on and on. That means she knew a lot of details about what was happening about the farm and the different animals. Well, that concludes Chapter 8. Thank you, boys and girls, for listening, and I will see you next time.